Hello, and welcome to Breakdown, where we have a breakdown and then we break down everything that's breaking down. My name is Ann Stott. I am your co-host along with
Tim McCarthy, your other co-host.
And we are here today recording this episode on day 9 of the new Trump regime, as I like to call it. And we're going to have a breakdown here because
we may just only have a breakdown today.
We may just only have a breakdown today because we knew it was going to be bad. We braced ourselves. He promised to be a dictator on day 1. He is delivering on that promise, as we knew he would, because he lies about all the good things he says he's going to do, and he tells the truth about all the bad things he says he's going to do.
Oh my God, that's so true. Oh.
It's so true. Mm-hmm. And so checking in, Tim, how are you doing?
This has been the longest year in the last week of my life. This last 9 days feels like an eternity, and it's never going to end, which is what eternities don't do. It's an absolute hellscape. I mean, yesterday alone, I went through whatever cycles of grief and emotion one goes through in a lifetime. I had literally yesterday. I mean, it was just too much, and it's all too much, but we can get into that. But I was pretty clear-eyed, I feel like, about what was coming. I had read Project 2025. I follow the news. I'm a historian, right? I'm on top of stuff. I feel like I'm not overly optimistic about our politics in this moment. I was ready for this, and this is so much worse and so much more accelerated and unrelenting than I ever thought was possible. And it's crazy making.
Yeah, and we knew they were organized, and we knew that, unlike 2016 and 17, when Trump had no idea what he was supposed to do, and nobody around him had any idea, they know what they're supposed to do. And he's also, this is a tactic, right, to do exactly what it's doing, which is to throw us off our center and overwhelm us and horrify us. And it's doing all of those things. And I don't think we're wrong for having those responses. I'm not saying any of that to say oh, we don't have time to have these feelings.
Right.
I think we got to have these feelings. But it's also a tactic of his to throw out the craziest thing.
That's right.
And take that back, and then throw out the half crazy thing, which is still fucking so insane. We'll see what that comes.
Right. The half crazy stuff is in a world that approximates normal would be insane.
Yeah.
And it's the compromise deal.
Yeah, no. Exactly. And I went in clear-eyed, I thought too, and it's just so disturbing. It's so disturbing. The calculated cruelty, the strong arming, the bullying, the onslaught of it all, the daily onslaught of what they're trying to do is devastating. It's devastating to queer people. It's devastating to trans people. It's devastating to immigrants. It's devastating to Black people and all people of color. It's devastating to women, and it's devastating to the country and to democracy.
Yeah.
So that's
one would hope it would be devastating to everyone. That of course is a naive and impossible hope in these times, but you have talked about in our past episodes, you bring up this idea of cruelty, and the cruelty is the point. And I completely agree with you. And we can get into more of that because there's an abundant offering of cruelty in every moment of our lives these days. But the chaos paired with the cruelty is also the point. and to the onslaught that is intended to overwhelm is meant to create such chaos that people are constantly unmoored and unsettled. And that's the thing. And I know that we both know that, right? We know that this is the playbook. We're not unused to that. We're not unready for it. And yet at the same time, you find yourself caught up in it, and it's literally happening to you. And that's one of the emotions that I'm having right now, is that I am so frustrated sometimes with myself for not taking the bait, because I'm not taking the bait, but for like falling into the vortex of chaos and then feeling like I don't have my bearings about me. And so I'm frustrated by that. Not that I'm internalizing this or blaming myself for having a struggle of navigating this. We're all struggling to navigate this. Trump's struggling to navigate this. He's a chaotic, incompetent too. That's a whole nother conversation. But I want to find my bearings and keep them. This, being in conversation with you helps that. There are other things that help that. We can talk about the things that we're trying to do to get our bearings and to have some security within this chaos, and not succumb to the emotional tyranny of the whole thing. And yet here we are. And yesterday in particular, right, is, the day 8, where we see, that ridiculous freezing of federal funding, which threatened to bring not just the country, but the world to its knees. And the halting of HIV medications under PEPFAR, which was a George W. Bush program that has enjoyed entire bipartisan support since it was implemented in the early years of the 21st century. Those two things alone sent me reeling yesterday. And that was before I realized that today, this morning, is the congressional hearings to nominate for the nominee to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and then Caroline Kennedy's letter and video. It was like every minute of the day yesterday was tugging me in a different emotional direction. And it's unsustainable, frankly. You've also used the word exhausting and exhaustion to talk about these times. But it's frankly what I'm most concerned about in this right moment right now is that it's unsustainable what's happening. And so it's either got to die down at some point or something else. And I don't know what that something else is.
Yeah. I'm not sleeping well. I'm like, my synapses are fried. I'm bouncing from one article to another, trying to get my bearings on what's happening and feel like wrap my mind around it all. Right. And we cannot, being who we are right now, wrap our minds around it all. We can't. We're not, we can try, but it's too much. It's too much. And, I think it is going to slow down when he's already playing golf. He was playing golf the other day. You know what I mean? He's already playing golf. The Project 2025 people are going to keep going, but, it will slow down. And also I think for some people, what's going to happen is you pick an issue and you stay focused on that issue, and you don't always keep up on everything, because we're not going to be able to keep up on everything.
No, like drinking from a water hose. The other thing too, for me, that is hard is that, I and you, we both care so deeply about our communities and the people that constitute them, whether we're talking about our families, our chosen families, our creative colleagues, our intellectual partners, our partners that we are in love with, and who tolerate us when we talk to a screen and to each other. But young people, I'm a teacher, I have students. It's hard enough for me to manage my own self-care and my own emotional turmoil and trying to kind of self-regulate, which I feel like is a full-time job right now. But I'm also responsible to and for other people who I care about deeply. And you are too. And that is I'm also worried about that, about my capacity to show up for the people in my communities that I want to show up for, and who sustain me, and who I try to reciprocate with that as best I can, because that's really important to me. And I think that community piece is the antidote to the chaos, right? For many of us, is to try to find people who we can be with in these times. I mean, that's how this whole show got started, was you and I found each other in the produce aisle in Stop and Shop in Provincetown, which I'm never going to tire telling that story. And I mean, people are going to, get sick of hearing about it. I don't even know if I bought vegetables that day, but it doesn't matter. Like being in community and finding each other, whether that's intentional or it's coincidental as it was that day for us. And then this show is a much more intentional attempt for the two of us, at least, to be in community with each other, and then to create community with anyone who wants to be part of this. But that to me is really important, because if we are going to get through this, if we have any hope of getting through this, we have to care for each other and ourselves in this moment, and to maintain enough emotional bandwidth to do that also feels like a full-time job.
It is, I think. And I think going back to, like, someone I'm friends with who came out as trans a few years ago and is now sort of experiencing being a target in a way that she never has before. We were texting this morning, and she was asking why this moment is so different. And I think in 2016, 2017, there was this shock, and there was this sense that if we use these tools, we could end this, right? Like, we could turn this around, the situation. And to some extent we did, right? And now we're in this situation where it wasn't fully turned around. Like, it wasn't, whatever the confluence of economic, misogynist, racist, xenophobic factors that have melded together in the guise of Donald Trump has not been purged sufficiently from our country and our culture. And so we're in this moment where we're like, oh, this is a longer haul. And we know what 4 years of this feels like now. And we know it's more dangerous. And I think people are being very intentional about, how am I going to survive this? Yeah. How am I going to get through this? And then also more strategic about where and how am I going to put my energy into this thing, which unfortunately in this moment looks like silence to some extent, but I don't think it is. I think some very deep, energetic, recalibration is happening on the left. I'm not speaking for the Democratic Party, which I think is being too silent on the national level.
That is their job, is to speak up. Period. That is your full-time job, Congress people. Get to it. Get
to it. You're behind.
Right.
You're 8 fucking days behind.
Right. And we gave you that job. We can take that away from you.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, and then it's very hard to sort of build your internal reserves while you're being bombarded every day with this terrible news. And so I do trust that we're stealing ourselves, and that, we will, rise. I don't want to say rise again, sort of come forth with a new strength and a new focus. And something's gonna light the fire, and people are gonna say, I mean, everybody we know is against this, and the left is against this. And the truth is, the majority of Americans are against a lot of what's being done right now. But it's just gonna take us a minute to kind of build the next wave.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between, I don't think it's silence for a lot of people. I think it's strategy for sustainability, right, rather than silence. And like you said, picking your issue choosing to give your energy to the things that you can have some control over, that you can have some impact on, right? Picking issues that directly affect you or your communities and focusing on those things, right? We can't do it all. We can never do it all, but especially in this moment, we can't do it all, because the whole point is to drain our energy in any way that they possibly can by perpetuating this unrelenting chaos. And it's meant to do all the things we've talked about. But I struggle too, right? Because we've talked about this before. There's this thing that I'm seeing, especially with people that I'm close with and in community with, people on the left and progressive folks. There's a much more, I think, obvious intentional diet of news, curation of breaking news, really rethinking our relationship with social media, right? There's a very different set of conversations and debates and practices emerging in this moment around media broadly defined, right? Like I still have not watched a television news show since the day after the election in November. I've already gotten off certain social media platforms. I'm limiting my screen time. I'm trying not to doom scroll, right? The media that I do consume is like print media that I subscribe to, some online stuff that I know is reliable and trustworthy, that is not in the project of circulating misinformation and disinformation, which so many media outlets are invested in, alas, in this moment. And I don't quite know why this moment is different. I think part of it may have to do, back to your point about the pacing yourself to be able to sustain yourself through this. But I also wonder if there isn't a heightened consciousness and recognition around the oligarchs who own these media companies, and particularly the billionaire tech bros who are in the second row behind the Trump family at the inauguration, who are literally the people who have created and are cashing in on our addiction to screens and platforms that become a virtual Roman forum to keep us addicted and distracted while the destruction carries on. And I think, like, I certainly am much more aware. When I looked at that row of Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg and all of these people, Tim Cook, all of these people sitting in that row together, I was like, that's the point. Like, they've captured these people in this government, right, who are cashing in on us and making profit off of us while feeding an addiction that I think, are now recognizing we have. And I think many of us are trying to have interventions with ourselves and each other about how much we're willing to do that. Because ultimately, if that digital universe becomes our 21st century Roman forum, then we really are in the decline of this American civilization. And it's the end of days in that way, of this kind of moment of history. And I'm not usually an end of history kind of person, but I do think about something that's happening differently this time than last time, at least among the large communities and circles that I travel in.
I totally agree. And I think, when I thought about us doing the show, there have been these articles about how the right has out podcasted the left, right? That there just aren't as many sources of information. Obviously, there are people doing great work, so I don't want to diminish that. But I think this sense of you've made me think about 10 things at once. So I'm going to have one of these awkward moments where I'm trying to put it all together. So, we've talked about the fact that, on the one hand, the Democratic Party is the only party actually trying to help working people. And yet it's not enough, right? And I told you that I watched Jon Stewart's interview with AOC Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez this week, and she really condensed it down into a perfect sentence. She said, the Democratic policies to try to help working people traditionally have nibbled around the edges of the problem without going to the core of the problem. And I was like, yeah, that's it. And I feel like the media, even the television, advertising supported media that is even traditionally called like liberal or left, which whatever, you and I could spend 10 shows breaking that shit down, right? But
which would bore even us. After a while, I'm like, oh God, enough.
So those media outlets have tried to tell the truth about Trump, tell the truth about what's happening on the right now, but it's still, it's funny because I don't watch TV news, like haven't watched TV news. Like I watch TV news election week and I watch TV news, like twice a year, literally.
Conventions or something.
Yeah. And this last week, I, on YouTube, watched a couple of episodes, clips from someone's show who I respect, who I'm not going to name, not worth getting, it's not about personalities with this. And I couldn't stomach it. Like I couldn't stomach that even. And this is someone I respect who's really smart. And it's like, because it all exists in the guise of making TV, right? Like it all still lives under this umbrella of like infotainment on some level.
Yeah.
Partially because, as Ellen said the other day, we should not have a 24-hour news cycle. Like it is so damaging to the news. And right now, like what is happening in our country is so devastating. It's so foundational. It's so could be.
Yeah.
It is looking like, and unless something dramatic happens to shift where we are right now, could literally be, a radical demarcation point in history about what this country is. And like, unless you're acknowledging that and your sole purpose is like, we're in this together, like it's false. It rings false.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this is absolutely, there's no question in my mind. I mean, I'm a historian. I should never try to predict the future, but I know enough about like how people think about the past and other times in history to have a very confident sense that we are living in a world historical disruption that will be a kind of breaking point or transition point in some way of mapping out the longer arc of history. There's no question that we're going through that, and that this is going to be one of those sort of Trump eras or pandemic eras that is talked about the way the 60s are talked about, or the Great Depression is talked about, or the Civil War is talked about. I really don't see this not being that significant in different
ways. I think is also, I think is also why a lot of people are having this instinct to go local.
Yeah.
Like this instinct to kind of shore up their local networks, their local support, their local community, which is a segue into your experience. You took a trip to Florida.
Yes, I did. This week, I was just in Florida less than a week ago.
I know. Talk about a year in 1 week.
Yeah.
So we'd love to hear, though, what that experience was, because it's so connected to everything we're dealing with right now.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I have not been to Florida since before the pandemic, and in my head, part of that is a kind of boycott of Florida, so that I'm not contributing to the economy of a state that has passed such incredibly draconian laws around, the Don't Say Gay bill and all of the sort of assaults on not just diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, but public education writ large across the state, in a state that already was struggling with its school system. But there's so many things about Florida that are unbelievably disdainful. But I'm connected to Florida in a really weird way because my parents, who I grew up in upstate New York, and my parents moved to Florida, the Sarasota area, after they retired as public school teachers. And so they lived there for a decade and a half. And they lived in Florida during the time when it took the turn that it now has become this red state that's, run by Ron DeSantis. And really
because it's, sorry to interrupt, it's wild to remember that Florida was a purple state for a long time.
Yes, Florida was the swing state often. I mean, the 2000 election was determined by what happened in Florida, right? I mean, that was less than 20, it was 25 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. Just a generation ago. Florida was, leaned blue as a purple state in many ways. I mean, Obama won Florida, right? And I don't know if he won both times, but he definitely won in 2008, and as I recall correctly. But anyway, I have this relationship with Florida because my parents lived there, and I would go down there because we had the semester break during the holidays, and I had most of January off. So I would often go down and visit them during January, which was great, right? It was a little, vacation for me, and I got to see my parents, and it was wonderful. And so during that time, I got connected to this local nonprofit called the Boxer Diversity Initiative, BOXSER, and it's a nonprofit that in the Sarasota area that is run by this couple, Dan and Lytton Boxer, and they host a whole bunch of different kinds of programming and educational work with local schools, colleges, and high schools and middle schools in the area around issues of diversity writ large. And so it's really a wonderful, they're wonderful people, and it's a wonderful organization. So I got hooked up with them and started to do some programming when I would come down to visit my folks. I would always do like an event in January, like a public conversation or a panel, and I would often lecture in the public schools in the area, and a range of things. There was even a moment where I was in conversation with the former president of New College, which is right in Sarasota, which is one of the flagship public universities, colleges there, that has a great arts program and other things, and about maybe being a kind of having a visiting faculty appointment so that if my parents were going to stay there, I could be close to them for at least part of the year moving forward. So, I mean, all of that was like a part of my life before the pandemic. And then when the pandemic happened and the DeSantis takeover took root, my parents just could tell that the shift was taking place, and they started to really not like Florida anymore. And they were there for two election cycles, 2016 and 2000. And my mother in particular was really heartbroken over the people that were in their sort of group of friends that they had met down there who turns out were Trumpers, and a lot of white women were anti-Hillary, super anti-Hillary. It really, really started to weigh on my mother and really bother her. So anyway, they've now moved. My parents have now moved back up here. They're on the Cape, as you know, you've met them, and they're right near us here. But I'm still connected with the Boxers and with the Diversity Initiative. And they asked me to come down this year for the first time since the pandemic to do a big public event on power and the people, on social justice in America since the civil rights movement. And it was paired with this opportunity to work with these local high school kids who are part of this fellowship program called Bending the Arc. These are high school kids from across the Manatee and Sarasota County who have opted into this year-long educational program to study the civil rights movement and its many legacies. And it includes a spring break trip to the South to all of the different hot spots from the civil rights movement. And they're just like this amazing, diverse group of young people. So I met with the kids and their teachers, this amazing woman, an older Black woman who's been teaching social studies in the public schools for 2 or 3 decades. And I met with them, and then I did this big public event. Usually the big public events take place at New College, but because New College has been decimated by the DeSantis administration, we can no longer have programs on diversity at New College because it's illegal. And so we had to have this program on power and the people in the local Unitarian Universalist church with a big Black Lives Matter sign out front. It's a sanctuary church. It has rainbow and progress flags flying outside. So they're showing up and showing out at this church. And I love the UUs, good folks. I'm not a churchgoer. If I were, I probably would go to a UU church. And so it was a really wonderful occasion, and it was a packed house in the evening on a Thursday night. And so I was down there working with these folks, and then on Friday I stopped by another nonprofit organization that's a youth-led nonprofit that was founded by one of my students, Xander Moritz, who's a former high school kid from Florida who successfully pushed back against the Don't Say Gay bill. So I went to their headquarters and met the staff. It's all these amazing, like bright-eyed, like brilliant young people who are really changing the game of local organizing. So in a weird way, I knew I was going into the belly of the beast. It was somewhat kind of heartbreaking and nostalgic for me because it was a place that I have wonderful memories with my family. I have these rich relationships with these folks, right? But I was going into this place that's really been radically transformed to the right in the age of Trump and DeSantis. And so I wasn't really looking forward to this trip, I will say, but there was something about being in community with all of these people, especially the young folks, these high school kids and my former student and his youth activist cohort, that really gave me a light. And it was the first time I had felt a kind of lightness to my spirit and hopefulness in my mood in a long time.
Oh, that's wonderful. And you're saying they were all really bright-eyed. So were they not, I mean, are they so in it with Florida that, and let's be clear, some of what Trump wants to do around education is modeled on what DeSantis did at New College, right?
Absolutely.
So are they so in it already that the sort of national thing is like, yeah, we've been here? Or are they feeling demoralized? Like, what was their mood in this moment?
Well, they're very clear-eyed. They're bright-eyed, and I'm talking about the young people in particular. They're bright-eyed, but they're clear-eyed. They know what they're up against and what they're experiencing, and they're fighting, right? Because they've been in it longer. In a certain sense, I mean, Florida was like the incubator for the MAGA movement. It turns out I didn't put this together until I got there. But one of the women on the school board, this person named Ziegler, is the founder of Moms for Liberty. You know, the one who got caught in that erotic threesome with her husband and some they're in a kind of like sexy throuple while they're advocating for traditional values. I always love those folks. There's no shortage of them on the right.
Every time.
All the homophobes are the pedophiles. It's not the homosexuals who are the pedophiles. It's the homophobes. Turns out
it's the homophobes who are the pedophiles.
The young one in the closet. Anyway, but she's on the school board down there. So Moms for Liberty was actually founded and incubated in Florida. And of course, now they're all over the place, taking over school boards all over the country. So in a sense, they've been at it longer than many people across the nation, especially those of us who live in blue states who might not really know the realities of what it's like to live on the ground in a red state. So they're like tested, they're battle tested, and they've figured out not just how to resist, but how to win. And it was amazing to talk to all of them about what they're doing and the coalitions they're building and the very creative ways that they're trying to intervene in and outside the system. And the other thing that really struck me that was, well, there are two things that struck me. One was the intergenerational dimension of this, right? Mm-hmm. In the church on Thursday, most of the questions came from the young kids, the high school kids who are in this Bending the Arc fellowship. And the way that the elders, there was a 92-year-old woman who was part of this nonprofit that's led by youth, and she does all this like community organizing. She's a 92-year-old veteran community organizer there. She's 92, and then there's like 15-year-olds who are asking questions, and they're all sitting together. And the incredible respect that the elders in that room across the generations had for these young people was so beautiful. It was so beautiful and deeply reciprocated, right? The kids really looked up, and it felt, I mean, without being too gauzy, maybe I'm just like so exhausted that I'm like searching for things anywhere I can find them, but it did feel like a beloved community in that church and in those spaces. And without overstating it, but they also know what they're up against. When I went around the room, there were 24 students in this fellowship program, and I was in a classroom with them, and I just went around. I said, "Tell me who you are and why you decided to do this program, because this is an extracurricular educational program that you've chosen to be part of. That's a lot of work, and it's a lot of time and commitment. And so, you don't have to do this. Like, what did you do?" And I kind of expected them to be like, well, it'll be good on college applications, or like I take AP classes, or I love the teacher. All of those things were probably true too. They certainly love the teacher. But every single kid, in their own words, had a version of, we are being robbed of our education. Our education and the truth of history is being stolen from us. We're being miseducated. The public schools are a disaster. That we are not being served by the state in a way that they should be serving children to set them up for success. Every single kid, one by one by one by one. It was a cascade of critique, clear-eyed critique about the failure of the Florida and the U.S. educational system and their deep sense of wanting to claim agency in their own education so that they could find truth. And they were trying to find themselves in the pages of history. They wanted to study people who were change makers and social movements that created change. They wanted inspiration. They were looking for hope. They were looking for models of multicultural activism. It was so beautiful. It was so beautiful. And I was like, these kids are totally on point. Like, these kids should be in the Department of Education. And it was so moving to me because, you know, they didn't parrot each other. They built on each other. It was incredible. I was so moved by it. It brought me to tears 2 or 3 times just in the hour and a half I was with them before the big public event. And then I've been thinking about them nonstop. And of course, they've been emailing me. The 4 of them emailed me this week because they want reading recommendations and syllabi and on African-American writings and on queer history and the history of feminism and women's rights and the history of voting rights. So they've been emailing me like, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Thank you so much for coming and visiting with us. These like high school kids, I never would have done that when I was a high school. Could you imagine like have an assembly, some like Harvard professor shows up and talks, you know, with you for an hour and a half, and then you like find his email address, like on
an email, and
then ask for a syllabus and book recommendations in addition to what you're already studying. It's incredible. And so if you're looking for like hope, like there it is. And
thank you.
In the belly of the beast, there it is, you know, and it confirmed for me something that I know, which gets back to your point about local, right? We know that all social change movements start locally, right? The civil rights movement started in places like Montgomery, where there was a local bus boycott that was organized principally by Black women through churches and community organizations for a year, and they brought the segregated bus lines to their knees, right? All of these local campaigns in all of these different areas, like social movements don't start national. They start local. And sometimes they go national and global. Of course, we see that over time. But, you know, what I was reminded of, which I desperately needed a reminder of, is that there are these communities, these beloved communities that are seizing control over their destinies in the face of bullshit, unrelenting bullshit, right? And they're trying to figure out how to win and not just survive. And
where they are winning already.
They are winning. And, you know, you know, we live up here, and Provincetown's a bubble, and like, there's lots of local activism and creativity and community and so forth in places like this, right? But it was a good reminder to me to, like, when you get outside of these bubbles, there are other bubbles, there are other communities that are doing the deep work of social change and community building that are the lifeblood of democracy, and also the thing that will get us through this if we're to get through it. So it was absolutely. And last week, like flying down there on Wednesday after last Monday's inauguration I was a little afraid, honestly. I had a little bit of a pit in my stomach, but then I got there and I started hanging out with these folks, and I was like, this is where I need to be. So I was so grateful for the invitation. And just, I'm always happy to be in community with people wherever I can be. And that's just part of my DNA, I think. And it was,
but also a wake up call to the rest of us, right? Because they have been living with this, you know, super majority dictator-like takeover of culture, history, education, civil rights, everything, right? And they're, you know, resolved, clear, energetic, courageous, and showing up. So there it is. But also this thing of like the energy of youth. So I haven't really been on TikTok since the election. And a friend of mine who's still on there yesterday told me that since it went off and came back, like the algorithms are definitely different, like information's being suppressed, like it's different. But of course, the youth are finding ways around it, right?
Right.
So there are these young people making videos and they're like, oh my God, I found these boots and I love them. They're black, but they have this detail. And the whole time they've got a notebook up in front of them with like information written out, like executive order, blah, 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 socks. And I'm opposed to blah, 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 or like whatever political information sharing they're doing. And they figured out that, cursive, like the algorithm can't read the cursive
on
the thing. And so they're doing like they're saying what they know TikTok wants them to say and what they know TikTok will elevate. And then they're like sharing information visually.
Wow.
I mean, just fantastic.
I love that. I actually wanted to ask you, I'm glad you brought that up because I don't know what TikTok is. No, I'm joking. I do, but I'm not on it. So it's not my jam. Although whenever people show me a TikTok video, I usually enjoy it. But that's genius. And I actually had a question for you. We've talked about this before, but I'd love to ask you, I mean, I'm in most of the spaces I'm in are kind of educational spaces and schools and students and that kind of thing and movement spaces. But you also occupy and circulate in much more creative and artistic spaces than I do. And one of the things that suggests is like the creativity of youth. But I'm wondering, like, how are you seeing like artists show up in this time? Like, I know that you have a new song about to drop soon.
Next week.
Next week. I'm so excited for that. And I love your art and your brilliant artistic work, which I've, listened to your music. I've seen you perform. I've gone to plays you've been in, right? And so I have great admiration for your creative talent. And how are you seeing like your community of artists showing up in this moment? Do you see like a difference? Do you see a kind of focus? Do you see a creative explosion?
That's a really great question. And I'm not sure off the top of my head if, like we were talking about at the top of this episode, like, I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Right? Like, we've seen the artists who, well, I do think, I mean, these aren't my artists, but like more famous people performed at the inauguration than the 2017 inauguration, like there is this normalizing going on. And obviously Carrie Underwood has always been very religious and conservative. Kid Rock has always been conservative, but what the fuck, Snoop Dogg?
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck? And I really like Snoop. Like, that bums me out. Like, I've never followed Carrie Underwood. I couldn't tell you a Carrie Underwood song to save my life, but I dig Snoop and I am bummed that he went there. And in fact, Jewel, the folk singer,
I know,
sang at the Kennedy party or whatever, and then apologized later to her fan base because I guess she got a lot of blowback for it, as she should, and I saw some article that I haven't read yet about, I mean, not that I'm, trafficking in the Hollywood circles at this point in my career, but I think there's a lot of behind the scenes wrangling in Hollywood about like one, anticipating like what kind of suppression might come from the White House toward Hollywood in general and what direction they want to take. And I have no great expectations for resistance stances there, I'm afraid to say. So I think it's in the arts world, my sense is that aside from like perfunctory statements from certain organizations, I think there's a regrouping. With everything else. I'll see if something else that I witnessed sort of bubbles up. I'll say it as the episode goes on. But yeah, I think there's a regrouping and sort of recalibrating
Yeah.
going on like everywhere else.
Yeah, I think that's happening everywhere for sure. For sure.
And the theater problem is, right, like the theater problem is like nonprofit theaters that have seasons, they're mid-season. The really established ones have already curated their 2025-2026 season.
Right, yeah.
Now, they might have done some curation around all the issues that this election was about without knowing the outcome, but obviously now we're plunged into a very different reality, and they're not really at liberty to make creative statements about that until 2026, 2027.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it's interesting. You know, it's interesting because it depends on what art, right? I mean, like obviously if you're a graffiti artist or a street muralist or something, you can create more quickly than you can a playwright, right? And or someone in a singer-songwriter, right? You can write songs. I don't mean to belittle the process, but more quickly than producing an album, right? Or signing a deal for an album. And writers too, right? Short form is easier than longer form, and it will be interesting to see how this moment what impact or ripple effects it has later on. Like, what will the 2025, 6, 6, 7 seasons look like at theaters that are willing to take risks? Because we've seen, certainly on Broadway and some of the more established theaters, you've seen so many revivals. There's so many. I mean, not that revivals are bad. I love a good revival. Right? I loved Angels in America, the revival on Broadway on the 25th anniversary of the original. There are some in the version of it that was here at the Provincetown Theater as well. There are a lot of revivals coming in, and revivals can take on new meaning in different moments, right?
Huge new meaning.
Yeah, like if you restaged Hamilton, I don't even know if Hamilton may still be running, but like
it is
in this moment, it would be, I mean, I'm sure Hamilton would land differently to me if I saw it tomorrow than I do now. It's interesting because I'm actually going to New York tomorrow, Thursday, to go to V, my friend V, my dear friend V, formerly known as Eve Ensler, the famous Broadway and Tony Award-winning playwright of Vagina Monologues and many other wonderful iconic works. So V and I have been friends for years, and she has a new show. It's a newly named revision of a show that actually was up at the American Repertory Theater a number of years ago that Idina Menzel starred in and helped to write some of the music for. So there's a one night only kind of showing of V's play, and it's tomorrow night, and I'm going down for it.
Oh, wonderful!
Which will be wonderful to kind of be in that space, and it's a really ambitious, creative piece that actually centers young people and youth activism and creativity and imagination in service to this really powerful critique of the climate justice catastrophe, and young people sort of speaking back against and to their elders and parents and older generations for giving them this toxic inheritance of a planet gone bad. And I remember when we saw it, it had the Boston Children's Chorus was the ensemble in the play at the ART, but then it had to close because of COVID. Many of the cast members got COVID, and so it had to close early. So they've been revising and rewriting and doing new music for it, and now it's going up tomorrow. It's a one night only show. I think it will probably have a longer run somewhere soon, but it'll be interesting. I was texting with V earlier this week, and I was saying, I wonder how this will land for me now, and in relationship to how it landed for me 2 or 3 years ago, right as we were coming out of the terrible part of the pandemic. And so it'd be interesting to see how this lands, and whether or not that piece of art, which I had seen before in some version, lands differently again. So, I'm really interested in like how art both reflects a moment and represents a moment, but also how it actually changes or shifts our understanding of the moment we're living in. That kind of constant back and forth of art. That's one of the things I love about art, is that it can both shape and represent what it's shaping, if that makes sense.
And continue a cycle of shaping and representing over time when it's great art. I think too, it occurred to me that I think there's been a bit of a distraction to responding from the inauguration by the LA fires. And even for artists who don't live in LA, like certainly if you're in the music industry, if you're in movies, if you're, like there's just this tie to LA. And so, there are concerts planned about that and fundraisers planned about that. And so it's, I think it's this particular week, 2 weeks is tricky, in that a lot of people are still putting their energy into that local community, which desperately needs, whatever people can give it. So,
Absolutely.
So,
can I ask you a question about your own process? Feel free to say no if this is too much, but like, are you finding yourself like that your creative juices are flowing more right now in the wake of this chaos and cruelty, or do you find that you're stuck or having a hard time creating? And I say that because I feel like my writing juices are flowing very fully again in a way that like I feel like I'm constantly reading and I want to write all the time, and that is not always the case.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah,
that's very interesting. So I don't feel shut off.
Okay.
But I am not a writer who has an experience and writes about it. Like it goes through some process in me before it comes out as a song or something I've written, right? So I don't feel particularly inspired to write. And I also don't think I'd be like wildly blocked if I sat down and wrote, like, since I know I'm distracted.
Yeah.
And I know it's hard to concentrate.
Yeah.
So I wrote once last week, twice. And I would be very surprised if anything I put on the page last week becomes a song. Like shocked.
Okay.
But I also don't, and this is where like you have a book proposal with an outline, you have very clear goals. And when I sit down to write new songs, I have no clear goals. Yeah. You know what I mean? I'm just like, okay, what's going to come? How's it going to come? What's it going to look like? I don't know. Yeah. And so I know that like all time spent creating is creative time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so I don't mind if I spend a day writing and I know that probably none of it's ever going to manifest beyond my process,
what I had a dream the other day that I was like daydreaming, and I had this moment where I want us to collaborate on like a prose song where we'll like alternate verses and talking about our produce-aisle breakdown, and I'll like read like, and it'll be from our like perspectives. Like the song will be your perspective and the prose will be my perspective, and we can like perform it together in Provincetown this summer. And when we do like some live versions of this, and I had this moment, like I was like, we could call it like breakdown vegetables or like or whatever. Like I was producing breakdowns or something like that. And I was like, that would be fun. Like, I mean, I'm not going to sing because I don't even sing in the shower and no one wants to hear that nonsense. But I was thinking,
this has to happen.
Wouldn't that be fun? Or like,
yes,
try to write lyrics that you would sing, or like, I don't know, like I don't know. I just had this, like, we should like collaborate, like mash up. We're doing it already on this show, but like take our like,
absolutely.
Talents, although you're both a writer and a singer songwriter, so I'm limited in that. I only have so much to bring.
You are not limited, Tim. You have so much to bring. Yeah, well, and we are absolutely doing this. We're making that commitment right here on this show that this will be happening.
I want it. We have it doesn't have to be a thing that we even like, it doesn't have to be an album or a book. It just can be like one thing that is playful and fun that gives us joy and be another manifestation of the breakdown. The other thing too that I wanted to share with you that came to me recently, I was reading a book by, I might have mentioned this, Ross Gay, usually more known as for his poetry, and he's a Black poet who teaches at University of Indiana, and he wrote this book called The Book of Delights, which was a book that has been given to me by multiple people. Interestingly, it's been gifted to me by at least 3 different people because they thought I would like it. And I've read it now 3 times. And it's a book where he started out, I can't remember which birthday, it was either 40th birthday or 45th birthday. And he decided that he was going to write every day. He was going to write an essay lit, like a little essay. And he was going to, about something that delighted him the day before. And so it's like, all these different things. So there's like, he said he was going to do it every day. He didn't end up doing it every day, but there's like some over 100 little mini essays. Some are like a paragraph, some are like 2 or 3 pages. And they're on everything from like gardening to like peeing in a Gatorade bottle to the head nod that Black people make with each other when they recognize each other in public, to beating these two teenagers in pickup basketball. So that, like, dating, like, it's all over the place, and it's so moving and it's so profound, and it is indeed delightful. And it gave me this idea that now that I'm not teaching this spring, I'm gonna try every day I'm gonna try to go to the library in Provincetown, but I love, because it's such a beautiful space, but I'm gonna try to write something every day for a finite amount of time, with no goal of like publishing or a book or anything like that. Something about our life in Provincetown as a way to get to know like my new home, or my relatively new home, better. And I've been reading Mary Oliver's poetry. I think that's probably part of it too. So it's like I've been inspired by Mary Oliver on the one hand and Ross Gay on the other to do this like kind of daily practice. I'm kind of mashing them up. So who knows how that will come to pass. But that's my new thing that I think is a manifestation of the writing juices are flowing in ways that are not as directed and focused as they sometimes are. When I have a deadline or I have a particular project that I have to get done. But this just feels like, who knows if it'll ever see the light of day, but it's almost like a kind of glorious daily journaling or meditation journal. We'll see where it goes. But that's kind of, anyway, I don't know why I thought I would share that, but I'm sort of in that space. And that creative space for me does feel like generative right now.
Well, yeah, I think it's all really related. It's like, as creative people, we need to be creating, right? And we are better when we create. Like, that is just the truth. Like, my day is better when I've written. Like, I'm better. My relationship to time is better. Like, that's a very specific thing for me about, like, if I've written, like, my sense of the day and what I've done and what I haven't done is different than if I haven't written. Like, it literally changes time for me. And it's good for me to say that out loud. And, we were talking in the beginning about being strategic about, like, how to make this time sustainable and what to give to ourselves. So I love that you're having that, that inspiration and these new ideas, and to write about this place that you've already said is like a sanctuary for you seems like a very healing, self nurturing thing to do. And also, I love that you brought up the Book of Delights, which I've like vaguely heard of but hadn't read, so I definitely want to check that out. And we had talked about wanting to share like art or lessons from history that might be inspiring. And so I was thinking about Nina Simone, who's a huge source of information for me. And she wasn't a big writer. She mostly interpreted other people's songs, but I was just thinking, like, she wrote Backlash Blues. And I still believe we're in like the long-term backlash of having a Black president. Like, that is
no question.
Yeah. So like, unfortunately, that song is relevant, and For Women and Mississippi Goddamn. And like, I was just thinking about like this small yet unbelievably potent group of songs that she wrote that still live with us and are so powerful. And she was writing in the midst of, so much violence.
Yeah.
And, as James Baldwin once said, let's remember I'm writing between assassinations,
Yeah,
like
that's right.
just so much suffering and violence. So, Nina Simone, a huge source of power and inspiration for me.
So interesting that you would bring up Nina Simone, because the room that I was in with these high school kids in Florida was also an art gallery for a local artist who had painted a series of portraits, these huge portraits of different iconic figures from history, mostly African-American history, but not exclusively. And there was actually, I think I was standing in front of a portrait of Frida Kahlo at one point. But right to my left, as I was addressing the kids, was this giant portrait of Nina Simone, and in the classroom with the kids. And I remember thinking, I was like, when I saw it, I was like, Mississippi, goddamn, Florida, goddamn. And because Mississippi Goddamn is one of my goddamn favorite songs in the history of songs. Not just my favorite Nina Simone song, but like, I mean, that song is a reckoning.
Oh yeah. Yeah, takes no prisoners.
No prisoners. Oh my God.
And I want to say that I love that our conversation has gone all sorts of directions that neither of us predicted, which is part of what I love about talking to you. But I know we do want to stick to some kind of time frame here. And yep. I want to get into the ways I think Trump is weak.
Let's go to the weak sauce.
Right? Because we have, obviously he's got the power right now. He has the House, although I haven't looked into these races, but he stupidly like picked off some of the Republican Congress people to work in different administrative posts. So they're going to be special elections. What?
Elise Stefanik, my former student, Elise Stefanik. Believe it or not, hey, you win some, you lose some. Pete Buttigieg was also my former student. So anyway, Elise Stefanik is his nominee to be the next ambassador of the United Nations, and of course she has no qualifications to be the ambassador of the United Nations, so there's that. But she had to vacate her congressional seat, which is actually from the same place where I grew up in Albany, the Albany region. So she and I are actually both from upstate New York, and so she's vacated that seat. And right now, according to recent polling, the Democrat who's going to challenge for that seat who's running for the seat to replace her is winning, is the favorite. And so that seat might go back to the Democrats because he appointed her to be the UN ambassador, which she's again ill-qualified to do, but probably among his nominees, probably the most qualified because she.
Oh yeah, she'll sail through just because she actually has worked in government and knows what it is and can put a sentence together about.
She's capable of reading and, finishing a sentence and subject-verb agreement. I mean, she's quite smart, actually. But.
Well, and shrewd. And, yeah, so, and then there's a man who he's appointed to something, and then Matt Gaetz resigned. So,
right.
So now I don't have any Florida seat going blue. No. But, I mean, if they lose 2 seats, that's a big deal. Anyway, we're in this moment where he has all the, wow, why is this word escaping me? All the different branches of government on his side. He's strong-arming everything. He's putting out these unconstitutional, probably illegal executive orders, more cruel than we could have imagined. Like, we both, like we said, have gone in clear-eyed, and it's still worse. And it is worse. I mean, freezing, all spending. And then, I also feel like I've been clear-eyed about not counting on the Republicans for anything. Like, I hold them responsible for where we are right now, their capitulation, their cowardice. But then literally like confirming someone with alcohol problems and no financial management skills at all to run the Department of Defense, like that's a new low
No
to
record
me.
of military achievement.
But yeah, exactly. But
he's a sexual predator, clearly. I mean, like on deeply documented alcoholic sexual predator who is a mediocre at best member of the military for a short period of time. But do you know what he has? He has a degree from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. And he is now, where I teach, God bless us all. And he, I think, is now the highest ranking government official to have graduated from the Harvard Kennedy School. So anyway, we can move on.
That's a dubious honor at best.
I would have been filled with regret after the show if I had not brought that up. He was not my student when he was there, but yeah. So he's awful, absolutely. I mean, talk about absolutely unqualified. There's not even a shred of merit to his.
You know, I don't even think we've talked about this, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot. And it's a digression because I really, really want us to keep an eye on the cracks in, Trump's world. But remember in 2016, 2017, when we were like, well, when we get rid of Trump, like what we really have to watch out for is the next one, because the next one's going to be like smarter and smarmier and like look like they play the game but still is dangerous. And I feel like he and Vance are like the two versions of that. So first of all, we didn't really have to look out for the next one because actually we just have to deal with Trump again, which is so fucking horrifying. But I feel like Vance and Hegseth are like teed up to be that next person, you know?
Yeah. I agree.
But getting back to the cracks, because and maybe this is me like needing to grasp at like any hope or whatever, but we need to point out a few things, I think. So one, he pardoned all the January 6th rioters, which totally pissed off the police union, which is like core base for him, right? Like core base. So some of those police officers were probably at the January 6th rally. You know what I mean? Like it's not a total sweep, but I mean, police unions came out opposed to Trump doing this, like vocally, right? So that's interesting. Two, like he ran on lowering the price of eggs, bringing down inflation. Obviously hasn't done anything about that and won't do anything about that. And we need to see, how that plays out over time. But with his spending freeze, which has now been halted and then rescinded.
Talk about whiplash in 24 hours.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're talking about, SNAP programs and Medicaid and Medicare. And I mean, it's really, to me, a moment like in 2016 when, that moment was one of the most interesting cultural experiences I've ever had, where the Republican Party spent 8 years saying Obamacare is awful. You should hate Obamacare. This whole Republican base was like, we hate Obamacare, repeal Obamacare. Trump was like, I'm going to repeal Obamacare on day one. And then suddenly all these people were like, wait, I want my health insurance.
Wait, what about my insulin? Yeah, right.
Yeah. So he's rescinded Biden's thing to lower the cost of insulin.
Yeah.
He threatened Medicaid and Medicare. Like these are things that I don't think are going to make everybody turn against him and somehow get him out of the White House. But these are not smart. It's smart. They're smart moves if you want to be a dictator and you really think you can control 300 million people, regardless of what you promise them. And clearly he does, but they're not really smart if you want to keep your base on your side. But then here's something else. And I really want to talk about this because because nobody's talking about it. So in the day or two after the election, I got Heather Cox Richardson's letter. I assume you see her letters?
Yes, yes.
And there was one sentence referencing Trump's mental decline.
Yeah.
And in particular, an article from the Philadelphia Inquirer. So Will Bunch from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I'm unfamiliar with Will Bunch because I don't read the Philadelphia Inquirer, but I guess he's a columnist there. Mm. And it's a sort of newsletter, like, here's my take on the thing. It wasn't hard news, but in the Philadelphia Inquirer, there was this piece about Election Day. And one of the subheadlines was like, forget 4 years. Can Trump make it through the next 4 hours? And apparently, outside of his scripted inaugural address, he was slurring his words. Yeah. He was going off on random tangents that made no sense. He did that unofficial address to like the people in the ante room from the official inaugural room that lasted longer than his inaugural address and like went off like, I guess Governor Abbott was there. And so he was like, oh, we wanted to build this wall, but that wasn't a good idea because of this, like 15 minutes of construction, like wall construction talk. And then I was
infrastructure hour.
And then, so I Googled it. Like I Googled Trump inauguration, mental decline, slurring words. And the only article
was the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Was the Philadelphia Inquirer one. Yeah. Everything from the Times or the Post or the Journal was all from last year.
Right.
And I know, I get on some level that these papers that would write about it don't think it's worth writing about it because the Republicans don't care.
Right.
But that feeds this whole system of him just being propped up, unlike what they did to Biden, where after that debate, I read somewhere that in the 3 days after the debate between those three journals, the Times, WAPO, and the Journal, there were like 83 articles about Biden's mental condition. Yep. But meanwhile, we now have a president who is mentally compromised.
Yeah, and probably as much as Biden, maybe more.
I think worse because he's also snorting Adderall, right? Which is part of why he's mentally. I mean, anyone who worked on The Apprentice who's talked has said he snorts Adderall, right?
Well, so I remember that last year, I think it was last year, and they said that someone had found cocaine in the White House, and I remember joking to my friends, I'm like, whatever it takes, whatever it takes to keep Joe Biden up, moving, focused. He needs to do a bump every now and then, have at it, Joe. And no, in all seriousness, I mean, I think he is weak and vulnerable in ways that I think we don't pay enough attention to, all of which you've listed, many of which you've listed.
And the media doesn't write about enough and should be writing about constantly. And then the last thing is this Musk situation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Musk spent $250 million to help get Trump elected.
Yeah.
And now he's been in this ideological skirmish with Steve Bannon. And he's like, and there was this interesting post. So I have this friend, Alex Beach, who used to work in news and now she writes movie scripts. But we were talking yesterday and she was like, there's so many people who know these people who aren't talking and they need to be talking. And then within a couple of hours, it was like she was, could see the future because Caroline Kennedy's letter came out. And then this guy, Philip Lowe, who owns one of those tech companies Musk used to have shares in, did a long post about Musk and the Nazi salute. Did you see this?
No, I heard about it. I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Oh, the Nazi salute, but I didn't see that, his piece.
And he was like, well, he had a lot to say about Musk. He was like, Musk used to have the humility to say that he didn't know anything really about AI or technology. And now he wants to be all powerful, so he won't admit that sort of thing. But he said, of course, it was a Nazi salute. And he did it because he cares about consolidating power.
That's right.
And he needed to re-legitimize himself with Trump's base.
And he's got a direct connection to the Nazi party. His father was a Nazi. right? His family got to South Africa because they had to leave Germany.
Right.
Right? Like,
right.
His
Yeah.
dad was literally a Nazi.
No, yeah.
And he's clearly a white supremacist. I mean, he's a white South African, right?
Yeah.
Not white South Africans are white supremacists necessarily, but he certainly is. And the thing about the tech bros and Musk in particular, in addition to what you're saying, is that all of them, also the skirmish with Vivek Ramaswamy, who's left, right? He didn't even make it through day one because they couldn't get along with each other. And I love the joke that one of my friends said that, nothing says government efficiency like having two people in charge of the new Department of Government Efficiency. But anyway, so Ramaswamy and Musk can't get along. Musk and Bannon are feuding. But the thing about those tech bros and Musk in particular is that it's like the ancient classic story of hubris when they fly too close to the sun. Like, that's the thing that will be the undoing of the tech bro oligarch class that were sitting in the second row behind the Trumps, because they don't have Trump's marketing genius. They don't Trump's sort of political performative genius.
Mm-hmm.
They have other things that they do, but they're all absolutely entitled, arrogant, absolutely zero accountability in their lives for anything they do, personal, professional, or otherwise, political or otherwise. And don't you think it's just a matter of time before they fly too close to the sun and then they, plummet to the depths of hell? I don't know.
This is what I'm saying. I think Musk already has.
Yeah, he's certainly.
And he was told this week that his office will be across the street from the White House, not in the White House, which is a big symbolic, demotion. Yep. And he has to report to Susie Wiles. Is this how we say her name?
Yeah.
Not directly to Trump. So he's already having his access limited and will continue to have it limited as Trump, wants to be on the golf course more than anywhere else. He's going to get bored very fast, right?
Yeah, because
But Elon Musk is not going to he wants the power, and so he'll stay where the power is. But if he's denied access to the power, he's not fucking around.
Right. No, he's a loose cannon in all of the ways that cannons are loose, right? He's not going to stick around. He doesn't have to. He's going to go to Mars on a rocket ship or whatever the fuck he's talking about. But
also he's not going to stay quiet.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree.
So how's all that going to shake out?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
Trump
obviously
doesn't like it when his people leak shit. Among other things, Trump's a mafia boss essentially. Right. I mean, he'll cap your knees if he needs to. You can't have had the career he had as a real estate developer in New York and not be thoroughly connected to the mafia and to that kind of way of orienting yourself to the world. And so, it'll be interesting to see if that infighting and the fractures and fissures that you're talking about, the cracks, end up being self-defeating for them. And certainly that would be helpful. But in the meantime, we're in this, still in this unbelievable situation of chaos, because that hasn't all come to pass or fruition yet. But
it hasn't fully backlashed on them.
Right.
And I don't even think, it's a victory to have these freezes rescinded for sure.
Yeah.
And it's a victory to have a judge stay the birthright citizenship thing. All of these things are important to notice, but they're not real backlashes. They're not real consequences for what they're trying to do. And obviously we're still in this moment of extreme cruelty and pain. And I'm not trying to minimize that, but I do think one of the problems with our media, and one of the reasons so many people we know are not engaging with our media, is that there is not, true reporting happening on where Trump is weak and why he's weak and what that means. And so I want to keep an eye on those weaknesses. And I think it's very important to remember them, because this is not a solid foundation on which any of this is happening, right? This is bluster and mood and payback for people's favors and he may prevail to do the worst. I'm not in denial about that possibility.
Yeah.
But there is vulnerability here too. Big, huge vulnerability in his
huge. The best kind of vulnerability. The biggest vulnerability.
Wait, huge
vulnerability. It's so funny because as you were talking, me, I'm like a little bit weird about my like fetish for alliteration. And so you were talking about the cracks, and I kept thinking, chaos, community, and cracks. And then I started to think, oh my God, Anne is giving me hope, because what she's talking about and prophesizing and trying to manifest in the world is the Trump breakdown.
Yeah.
In all of this, which could help facilitate so much of
what
we're trying to do.
I love the way you just keep taking breakdown to the next level, the next level.
I am going to like spend time on this hill with breakdown. I'm going to come up with the many meanings of breakdown.
I love it.
I'm going to have alliterative delight in all that we do. I think we said to each other we were going to try to keep it shorter this time.
We did. I think we might be in a wrapping up moment that we should take advantage of. I have like 3 other things I want to say to you, but I'm like, you know what? This is a good completion moment.
I think we can land the plane today and pick up where we leave off here, because I have a bunch of things I want to talk about too. Like, I had a dot connection around birthright citizenship and Obama and Trump last week, but we don't have time to talk about that now. But I want to talk about that at some point.
Absolutely.
There's other things too, but I think I'm feeling better than I did 1 hour and 21 plus minutes ago.
Tim, if we have to find ways to nurture ourselves and build community, I am so grateful that we have connected in this moment and are sharing our thoughts. It's definitely nourishing for me, and always a pleasure to break it all down.
Likewise, I love it. Let's keep it going. Keep it moving.
We will.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take good care. Until next time.